Our group chose to do our presentation on the interview that was conducted with Dr. Mike Coyne. Dr. Coyne characterizes himself as more of a nomothetic researcher than an idiographic researcher. He says that he intensifies interventions for students based on approaches that have been proven effective but have already been developed. He said there are approaches that have been identified in many broad areas that can be tailored to meet the needs of students by being more intensified. He continually adjusts features of different programs or interventions to match the needs of his struggling students. He says that it's important to start with areas that all students need, then teach with effective strategies that are proven to be effective, and then work with that framework to align lessons or interventions to meet the needs of groups of students. For his most struggling responders, he says that the same content and strategies can be used, but with greater intensification, and that there is room to grow in both nomothetic research as well as idiographic research.
Dr. Coyne pointed out that nomothetic versus idiographic research presents somewhat of a false dichotomy. Instead of looking at these two bodies of research as separate entities, he suggests we use idiographic information about students to intensify interventions that have been proven to be effective in more generalized settings through nomothetic research. In other words, a researcher or practitioner may start with an intervention that has been proven to work with a larger population of students, but then adapt or intensify that intervention to better meet the needs of an individual student. In a recent study, researchers tried to think of ways to intensify or adapt already existing interventions to better meet individual student needs. Students who experienced an adapted intervention tended to have better outcomes.
Dr. Coyne's perspective fits well with the perspectives of other researchers we have studied this year. For example, Dr. Chris Lemons has evaluated tools such as curriculum-based measures that were initially developed for students with learning disabilities, but he evaluates their use with students with Down syndrome or intellectual disabilities. In many ways, this is Dr. Lemons using the outcomes from nomothetic research to guide or inform idiographic research. Similarly, Dr. Martins from Syracuse University discussed how functional behavior assessments and functional analyses procedures provide us with idiographic information about students, but that the procedures themselves are nomothetic and should be applied to all students who need them.
One lingering
The
question
first
that I
lingering
have
question is
is
whether
if
there are
we're
mixed
moving
methods
between
approaches
both
that could provide
approaches
us
as
with both
researchers, at
information
what
that is
point of
idiographic
student
and
struggle should
information
the
that's
researcher
nomothetic.
suspect that a fully idiographic approach to figuring out what a child needs would be best to use with that student? I agree
It's
with
hard for me to
Dr.
describe
Coyne's
exactly where I
perspective
lie
that
along this continuum
it's
of
important to move
idiographic
between
to
both
nomothetic
approaches and
information.
also
While
grow
I think I'm a
in
bit
both
more
of those
interested in
research areas.
idiographic information
Individualized
than more
interventions
of
can
Dr.
inform the
Coyne's
needs
research, I
of
agree with him
students that
that
are similarly
nomothetic and
situated
idiographic
but who are
findings
not
influence one
necessarily
another,
already
and we
getting
need them both.
interventions.
His publication on replication research is particularly important to me as I'm learning about implementation science and, in developing effective and efficient methods of training teachers to adopt evidence based practices, we'll need to perform systematic replications of current research. One concern I have is that the nomothetic approach provides us with information we need for idiographic intensified intervention for individuals. Some of the literature read for this module states that the nomothetic approach tends to take the average of groups, which I think can be a problem when researching students with disabilities, specifically students with autism spectrum disorder with whom I work.
I agree with Dr. Coyne's perspective on the ways in which idiographic and nomothetic research can and should support each other. The research I do often starts with evidence-based behavior interventions that come from nomothetic research. When students are non-responsive to standard protocols of behavior interventions, we often take a more idiographic approach as we adapt and intensify standard protocols based on specific student characteristics.